Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to our program today. I think this is such a great lineup and such an important topic for us to be covering. Just wanted to remind you to complete some of, if you have questions that we want to answer on the panel, please take a moment to fill those out, and I'll actually ask a couple of my team members to come around and collect those. So, I'm a clinical social worker by trade, and so my background is working with older adults and families in dealing with challenges that they face as we're aging, whether it's depression, whether it's memory loss, maybe Parkinson's disease, maybe family caregivers struggling. And so this particular topic is one that we often face. So at Banner Sun Health Research Institute, we're very fortunate. You met Dr. Spahn, we have neuropsychologists, we have clinical social workers. So we're really fortunate because these kinds of conversations and questions as family members can be really difficult. And so we're really lucky to have that kind of team to help support folks because driving is one of those hot topics, right? So when you look at the literature on driving, they talk about driving retirement, which I think is really an interesting term. I mean, it makes sense that we have to, at some point, for many of us, give up the keys, but it's not something we look forward to, right? I mean, it's, as many of our speakers have established, it's really such a symbol of a rite of passage in our community, in our society, right? I have many folks who talk to me, they've met with one of our neurologists who's told them that they really should not be driving, and it's a very personal decision for them. It's very painful. And so for many of them, they tell me about how they've been driving since they were 12 or 13, living in a rural community, maybe on a farm, and how this is really such a big step for them. So really what we talk about is really trying to be proactive. We want to really be respectful. I know with memory loss, at times, the person may have behaviors that seem somewhat childlike or frustrating. But we have to remember that this is such an important life transition, and we have to try to be as empathic as we can. So I think it's really a balance of being respectful, but also balancing the importance of safety, because that's really what we're talking about with driving, right? Think about yourself. I mean, we've all had situations where we were fiddling with the radio station, or we went to grab something from the seat next to us, or we looked too long at a billboard and we had a near miss, right? So we think about our own situations and how powerful vehicles can be, and the danger balanced with safety is really important. But we also want to avoid things like convincing folks. We really want to avoid scolding people. We really want to uphold that importance of respect and integrity and support. Because with memory loss, no one asked for this problem, right? The person with memory loss, the person with dementia didn't ask for it. You, as a friend, a family member, a partner, didn't ask for this, right? So we have to be gentle when we take our approach and really think about what we're talking about. One of the questions or cards that was asked earlier that I thought I'd just weave in here is, what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? So, I mean, I think about dementia as really an umbrella term. Underneath it are different types. Alzheimer's being the most common type. We also have many other things that cause or trigger dementia, like vascular changes, like strokes and mini strokes, Lewy body dementia. So lots of things can cause memory loss. But dementia is really just that umbrella term that talks about that change in memory, in language, in thinking. And when you have those changes going on in your brain, as Dr. Spahn specifically and eloquently pointed out, it really makes your ability to have good judgment, to have good response time, to have the ability to foresee problems. It really affects your ability to drive. So early on, we want to do things like drive with folks frequently. My father-in-law is 88. He lives in Mesa. He actually does not have any cognitive problems, but he asks my husband, his son, twice a year to drive with him because he wants to make sure that he's continuing to be safe. We want to ask just general questions, and I think that Jenny really touched upon this when she talked about, are you having situations where you want to avoid traffic? Do you think about giving up night driving? Are you one of those folks, as Laura said, that kind of just drives in your own neighborhood, those 2 or 3 miles that surround you? But then really being proactive and having the conversation. So as a social worker, those are the kinds of things that we do is in the office, is have conversations with folks who have memory loss, but also with their care partners. And usually when I'm having the conversation, I talk to the people as dyads or as families. So instead of just saying, you might have to give up driving, what are we going to do about that? I might say, well, what happens if one or both of you have to give up driving? What kinds of plans do we have to make? Or if one of us was to need care, what would that look like? Have we thought about that? Have we talked about it? Most of the time we haven't, because these are changes in life, these are losses that we don't want to think about, because they really affect our ability to be independent and align with the way we envision our life going forward, right? We all think that we're going to be independent and live in our own homes and drive until we're 98 and fall asleep and don't wake up in the morning. But for most of us, it doesn't happen that way. So planning ahead can really help us in that way. So what are some of the warning signs? I know we covered some of this a little bit earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I think, forgetting how to locate familiar places, and these are often the wake-up calls for family members, right? Because as Jenny was saying, we really want the person with memory loss to be introspective. We want them to think about what's happening and say, yes, I'm ready to give up the keys. But I'll tell you, in my line of work, in working with so many people with memory loss and families, that's not typically how it happens. And that's not because the person with memory loss is being difficult or stubborn. It's because the people around them often have a lot more insight and awareness into the changes that are happening within that person than they do themselves. So, driving at appropriate speeds, becoming angry while driving, and that often is a trigger. I've worked with many dyads, many couples, one in particular where the husband would often just get, increasingly verbally aggressive in the car while he was driving, and his wife really noticed that escalating and his judgment decreasing. Confusing the brake and the gas pedal, setting off for the local Safeway that you've been going to for the last 20 years, and the person says they're going to be back in an hour, and then they call you, and they're much farther away. But also those unexplained dings and dents, I think, on the side of the car, those accidents that happen or the near misses that happen that the person isn't going to tell you about. Again, often it's because they don't remember or can't put together the pieces of that particular situation or have good recall about it. And so they kind of brush it off. So how do you have this conversation? This is really the most difficult thing. I think this is one of the biggest challenges as memory loss progresses, as dementia, Alzheimer's, and other types. These are some of the barriers or the forks in the road, if you will, that many family members have to deal with. So giving up driving is one of those. So how do we do that? How do we do that seamlessly? How do we do that respectfully? How do we do that with kindness? So we want to avoid being confrontational because no one wants to have a finger pointed at them and no one wants to be scolded, right? So we have to put on that hat of empathy, right? To try to step into that person's shoes and imagine, what would it be like if Lori took my keys today and I couldn't leave the program? How would that feel, right? If I thought I was driving just fine, how would that feel for me? So avoid placing blame and try to remove the focus of blame from the person. And so again, I think that's why it's really helpful to look to guidance from your medical provider, because that way you don't always have to be the bad guy. Your job is to always align with that person and be on their side. Set realistic expectations. So I hope that in many situations, there are folks who say, yeah, you're right. Here are the keys. Or, yeah, I'm ready for you to take over. But don't go into it expecting that to happen. Don't expect the person to have really good insight, awareness, and judgment. And remember that the reason their insight, judgment, and awareness has changed, again, is not because that person is being stubborn or difficult. It's because that is a sign and symptom of dementia, right? your ability to have good insight and judgment, right? So this is where we hear about these stories on the news, right? The silver alerts, where someone thought they were totally capable, totally fine to set out and take a quick trip and come home, and then what happens? They don't come home. So we don't want to expect the person to remember their blunders, their near misses, or to come up to us and say, I'm ready. It's this fine balance, right, of keeping the person as independent as they can be, but then also implementing safety measures before it's too late. And so I think that's why this particular roadblock is so challenging, because it creates a lot of stress on many of us. So I often will talk with family members of somebody with memory loss, and they say, yeah, he's still driving. He hasn't gotten lost yet. And I think, well, do we wait until he or she does? So how do we strike that fine balance? Again, a lot of it is really using empathy, recognizing that it would be incredibly difficult for any one of us to give up our keys, imagining how it would feel for you. Think about how the memory loss has affected that person's ability to make good decisions, to have good judgment, to even have good reflex, deal with a crisis, deal with a car that shuts in front of them when it's unexpected. So it makes me think about how does memory loss really affect our relationships? So I don't know what any of you are thinking. Maybe you'll share during the panel, but I often hear from family caregivers that it's very difficult. Roles change, right? It might be a spouse and a spouse together, we're equal partners, and then one person's memory starts fading. And the other person has to really kind of pick up the slack and also look out for that person's safety. All the while, that reciprocity, that equality in the relationship is changing. And so that can be really difficult for folks. But again, our primary goal here is safety. And as somebody's memory changes, declines, and fades, our responsibility as professional caregivers, as family caregivers, as friends, is to put safety first and to do it in a gentle way. So I need to make sure that you're going to be safe. I want to make sure that other people are safe. I care about you a lot, and I really want to make sure that you or people around you don't get hurt. It's not worth it. So think about other elements, because you don't want to blame the person. So, there are a lot of aggressive drivers out there. The traffic in Phoenix metropolitan area is intensifying, right? It's construction season. The weather conditions in some places seem to be a good excuse, although here that's a harder one to buy. High insurance costs and medications. That's often as kind of a saving grace. If there's a new medication and we can use that as a way, that medication can cause you to not have good thinking, can affect your ability to think clearly, to concentrate, to focus. That may be a way to save face. But I think you really have to look at things that, Laura Johnson was talking about. The liability of an accident, car damage, the possibility of having your license revoked, legal implications. If we were to have an accident and you have, a diagnosis of memory loss, Alzheimer's, or whatever the diagnosis is, how would that impact us legally or financially? So I think really asking for help. So looking to your medical provider, whether you have a neurologist, whether you have a primary care doctor, whether you have a nurse practitioner that you work closely with, give that person a heads up before the conversation happens. So I've been really concerned about my husband's driving. I don't want to embarrass him, but I do think it's really important for us to take a stand on it. I was driving with him the other day and explained the factual information. And then if the person is really resistant, that's where a driving assessment can be incredibly helpful. If you're a pair, offer to have a driving assessment yourself as a way to soften the blow, as a way to make it as equal as possible. Anyone can fill out the Department of Transportation driver condition report. I've had folks that have had this done to them. I had a gentleman who I worked with years ago in counseling who had Parkinson's disease and really had some slowed thinking and slowed ability to make good decisions and judgment, and because of the disease process, had more rigidity in his body and had trouble turning his neck. And the story goes that he was leaving church one day and seemed to be driving erratically, and one of his fellow church members filled out one of these driver condition reports. And he got a letter in the mail from the DMV, and he had to go take a driving test, and he did not pass. So it was incredibly painful, and I imagine it was a hard decision for the fellow congregant. But I think, again, we're looking at really trying to make sure that that person is safe and ensure safety in our communities. Again, if you're working with a medical provider, they could also complete that form as well. But I think things often go better if you give the medical provider a heads up before the conversation, so they can lead it, they can drive it, and they can guide it. So we have a saying, weddings, funerals, and dementia bring out the best and worst in families. So family agreement, how do we get everyone on the same page? This is often a conundrum. We often have family members, family caregivers who are local, and they're seeing things more realistically. Maybe they see the person day to day. They're recognizing that driving is a challenge, and other things have become a challenge, in particular if that family member is living with them. And then we have other family members, right, who are living outside the home or maybe from a long distance. And they talk to their mom on the phone, and she sounds perfectly fine. And I don't know why you, Dad, are trying to take over Mom's life. She said she's driving fine. I asked her about it. And, I don't understand why you're, making something out of nothing. So why does that happen? There are many different theories. I think because in many cases the person with memory loss often has lack of awareness into their disease progression, it often fosters a lot of denial in the rest of us, right? Because this is obviously a very difficult thing to face. Why do family members not want to face that their loved one, someone who's always been, a goal setter, an achiever, a great parent, good in their career, incredibly successful, now has dementia? Because this is can be a huge challenge, right, to watch that person's abilities change and decline. So we create our own sense of denial, right? We don't want to deal with these tough questions. We don't want to deal with the tough issues. But if we can talk together as a family, or you can at least get one or two people on your side, I think that's really valuable for a number of reasons. It can help you and just initiate the conversation. I think it's a good way to have a conversation about the facts, what's really happening. Why do we have the dent in the car? Why was he or she, off on a quick errand that took 3 hours? We have to get on the same page. And we don't ever want to gang up on the person, right? But if we can discuss the problem ahead of time, maybe we can strategize about how to be as respectful as possible. Be aware, too, about what motivates folks. So I've worked with many couples, one in particular I can think of, a gentleman who, not just early Alzheimer's, but was really moving into the moderate stage of dementia. And he had been told very clearly with our neuropsychological report, as well as with social work and our medical director's involvement, under no certain terms should he be driving. But he kept driving. And we'd have conversations with his wife about it, and then what we learned is that she had macular degeneration. She hadn't been driving. So this was a secondary issue for her, a secondary benefit. I mean, if he couldn't drive and she couldn't drive, how was their life going to be affected? So it was really, really a significant problem, right? We have lots of folks like that. I worked with another couple that came here from Boston. The wife had never learned to drive. She'd always taken public transportation. Everything was very accessible there. And when they moved out here, she drove a little bit, but not much. Her husband, had that traditional role of driving. And when her husband first developed Parkinson's disease, we really kind of talked about how is this going to work? And for many people with Parkinson's disease, if they live long enough, they'll develop a memory issue, a dementia. And in his case, he did. But I was working with her in counseling over time, and she actually went to AARP and took a couple driving courses, and I think that really helped her boost her confidence and really helped solve this problem in some ways that she would be capable and comfortable in driving when he no longer could. So we want to use a kind and a firm approach, but we also want to share the load. Often it's really the primary caregiver who gets the brunt of the stress if we have to give up driving. Can one person, maybe someone who doesn't live with that person, be the bad guy, if you will, the one who kind of sets that limit? Is there one person in the family that the person with memory loss, with dementia, maybe Alzheimer's disease or another type, seems to respect or listen to more than their spouse or the person that's living with them? And if nothing else, we can at least get on the same page about how to help support one another. Often the primary caregiver, whether it's the spouse or a daughter, the person who's kind of taking charge of the situation, has to deal with a lot of stress and challenges. So enlisting the support of others, and if you're that other, can be really incredibly helpful in just validating that person's stress level and how difficult this is for both the person with memory loss, but also for the family caregiver. And just being creative about approach. Two heads are certainly better than one. I had one couple that the wife really didn't listen very much to her husband. She'd always been incredibly independent. But when her adult son had a conversation with her, it seemed to have a greater impact. And then her husband wasn't the bad guy, if you will. But I think, as Laura Johnson was pointing out, sometimes we have to take extreme measures. I had a woman that I worked with years ago who lived in her own apartment. She lived in a condo. She had been divorced for 20-some years, really very independent lady, and an artist, just a very creative, artistic, sharp lady who was starting to decline as a result of dementia. And no matter what barriers her daughter created to intervene when the neurologist told them that she could no longer drive, she ignored. And so finally, her daughter had the car removed from her condominium parking lot. And it was incredibly painful for her. And she was very angry with this daughter for a long time. But her daughter didn't know what else to do. So it was a situation that she was really concerned about her mom's safety. Her daughter this was a daughter who lived out of town, who ironically is also a social worker. So she's the one who had the car removed. And then the daughter that was local was kind of like the good daughter for a while. And it was painful for both of them, but they kind of worked together to support each other. So we talked a little bit about how roles can change with memory loss, and as a family, we can talk about that if we're addressing driving. Avoid and counsel other people the same as you, not to be scolding, not to be pointing the finger. We don't want to create a situation where it's us against them. We don't want to create a situation where the person is feeling penalized or targeted. So we want to try to develop a plan to have the conversation, but also have a plan and a solution to go along with that. We want to balance that respect with the ability to get around with safety. Don't wait for that person to decide on their own. Because as I mentioned earlier, and as Dr. Spahn talked about, the person may not be able to do that. And something bad could happen before that person actually realizes, if they ever do, that they really shouldn't be driving. So we want to be part of the solution. We want to use compassion. We want to look for local daytime activities for that person to participate in, to structure their time, to continue to make sure that they get out of the house, that they have socialization. We want to figure out what resources are available, and today we've done a lot of that for you. I think that driving guide from the Hartford is one that we use at Banner Sun Health Research Institute on a regular basis. AARP has a lot of great resources. They have a table as well. And I think we want to just provide transportation options. So we have an X-Connect is there, and Valley Metro, so there are alternatives. So we want to figure out a plan, whether we make a deal with the neighbor to take the person with them when they go to Safeway once a week, or if they go to the same bridge club. Figure out a way to create a carpool, maybe give that person some money so that they're being covered for gas. So that was something I did as a teenager. I had a friend who had a car, and we were both working at the same summer job, and I used to give her money so that she would pick me up and take me to work. So the same kind of thing can apply. If someone can offer to provide that ride is going the same place, look at opportunities to make that work. And offer to take that person where they need to go. Reassure them that, I know this is really painful, but we're going to get you where you need to go. And I think Laura Johnson shares my sentiments. Beware of the golf cart. So there's this element in the Sun City areas that if I have to give up my car, I can still drive my golf cart. Well, it's still a motor vehicle. And we can still get lost. We could still hit somebody. So I think use caution. Sometimes we're removing the car and relying on the golf cart, and then we're just creating another barrier when we have to remove the golf cart. So be thinking or planning when you're using that approach. So think about and discuss things like what we're spending on driving, how the money that we pay on the car payment or for gas or for insurance could be repurposed to pay for ride sharing. Locate volunteer rides, volunteer services, or other cost-effective options. There are some families now that are using, Uber and other programs, Lyft, to get folks where they need to be. Look at delivery services. Every time I open my email, there's a new one. Whether it's Safeway or whether it's your local pharmacy. I just got an email last week from Sprouts that they deliver. So look at ways to ease that burden and barrier. Most of us need a sense of purpose. We have to get out of the house and get out of our head, if you know what I mean. If we have too much unstructured time at home when we are used to leaving the house and running errands, that can create a problem in terms of that person's quality of life as well as their mood, right? It can impact their mood and depression. And then this is often where people are considering a move. So I had a 92-year-old grandmother who just passed in October, and she was cognitively intact. But every year she would worry about this driving test. And she knew that when she could no longer drive, that for her, living in a suburb of Chicago, that was going to mean a move to a senior community. At 92, she thought she wasn't quite there yet. And fortunately, she was able to drive, but she would consistently, take her annual or biannual tests to make sure, and knew that that was her plan B. When she could no longer drive, that would be her plan. So our Family and Community Services team has a tip card that we use and a saying that we have on avoiding arguments, that no one's ever going to win an argument with somebody with dementia. So it really shifts our approach. It shifts our communication. Even though if we've known this person for a long time, we have communicated the same way for 20, 30, and 40 years, but now we've got memory loss on board. So we know that Alzheimer's and other dementias affect that person's ability to communicate conventionally and effectively. And it affects their ability to understand. And so we really have to adapt and adjust the way we communicate, the way we reach our folks. So this tip card, these tips apply specifically to any situation that you're encountering, but in particular driving, right? We want to avoid correcting that person. We want to avoid placing blame, coercing them, convincing that person, or reasoning. When our judgment is impaired, our ability to reason or to get on the same page is affected. And so it really affects our ability and our approach to dealing with driving. So instead, we might want to agree. So that's why it's sometimes good to have the medical provider be that bad guy. So, I agree that, that driving would be great. I wish you could continue it. But Dr., Mrs., whoever it was, told us that you really shouldn't be driving, and so we've got to honor that. So you can be empathic. If it were me, I would feel the same way. But this is the order that we've been given. We have to follow it. And then you can apologize. You can reassure. I'm sorry. I can see that you're upset. I don't blame you. But don't worry. I'm going to take you anywhere you need to go. I'm going to make arrangements for you to get where you need to go. And then distract. So we don't want to belabor. We don't want to get stuck on this conversation. We want to distract. We want to change the subject. So I know it's a really difficult pill to swallow. I know it's really difficult. We're going to do the best we can, and we'll tackle it together. Well, let's go now, because we've got an appointment that we got to keep, and change the subject. So when the going gets tough, be prepared. Be prepared for that person to maybe not take it gracefully, to feel upset, to be angry. Try to be patient and try to be firm. Acknowledge the pain of that change. Don't blame yourself. Remember that a lot of the reaction, a lot of these changes are related to memory loss, not something any of us can control. Know that this might not be the only conversation, but keep our conversation short and simple. If the person is really escalating, is really upset, we end the conversation there. No reason to have a battle, no reason to have a big conflict. If there's greater resistance, we really look for ways to distract from driving. So, it's just been you and me, and I really need the practice. So I brought a book for you. You can just enjoy the ride. Use music or an additional person in the back seat to distract that person, to be talking with them so that they're not so focused on the fact that you're driving and they're not. Structure daytime activities to keep that person feeling a sense of purpose, feeling engaged, feeling valuable. Whether it's some activities that you coordinate, or maybe you're not an activity therapist. Maybe that's not your strength. And that's where community partners like Benavia or the Foundation for Senior Living, who do a good job with structured life enrichment for people with memory loss, can be incredibly helpful. Look for volunteer options, or look to one of the many in-home caregiver agencies and programs that we have here. Maybe that person doesn't want a caregiver, but they might want an assistant or a driver. So a lot of it is how we say what we say. A lot of it is the semantics. Makes the semantics palatable for that person. And as Laura was lamenting, as a last resort, we can send the car to the auto shop to be repaired. And then we can blame the auto shop when it's not ready in a timely fashion. We can have a designated driver maintain exclusive access to the keys. I had a similar situation, I think that Laura described, where I had a dyad, a couple I was working with, and the gentleman was an executive with a tire company for many years and had retired 15 years ago due to Alzheimer's related dementia. He had forgotten that, and so he would get up every day at his usual time, 5 o'clock, and he would get dressed and kiss his wife goodbye and let her know that he was heading off to work. So what she did was swap out the keys. She gave him a set of keys that didn't work for that particular car. He would go out, try the car, come in, shoot off some expletives, and she would say, "Oh my goodness, that doesn't make any sense." But you know what? The office called today, and they're really well staffed. They don't need you. And I would really like if you would come and have coffee with me. I thought we could spend the day at the MIM, the art museum. So the musical instrument museum. And that's how she would distract him. So every day he would get up, and it was the same routine. So remove the trigger. So my sister and brother-in-law were in town from Reno a couple weeks ago, and my sister-in-law's father has had multiple strokes. He has had a lot of other health problems, and he just moved recently into assisted living community. And the doctors told him under no certain terms can he drive, but that's been an important passion in his life, driving in his trucks. And his truck is at the assisted living community, so every time he looks out the window, he sees his truck and he asks about driving. So we talked about we need to remove that trigger, right? It's not helping anybody. It's distressing him, and it's reminding him about this idea that driving is not an option for him. And so we have to move that out of sight. Even sell the car if that's what we need to do. So get support. Don't go at this alone. Look to medical professionals for help, whether it's your primary provider, a neurologist, a social worker, a counselor. Have a script or a letter from the doctor. Sometimes that can be helpful in just reminding the person about that directive. Attend a support group. There are a lot of incredible support groups at Benavia, at Sun Health. We have several at Banner Sun Health Research Institute, the Alzheimer's Association. We're very lucky to be in this somewhat metropolitan area where we have lots of choices. And people say, well, I don't really need that support, but you will need support to be successful in this journey. So learn strategies from the experts. And I don't mean the experts like me who facilitate these groups. I mean the experts like you. So the people in the group who have endured and overcome this challenge before and can guide you and can tell you what they did and how they handled it and what worked. And early stage memory loss support groups for people if they have insight or they want that. I met with a gentleman just the other day who has just his mild cognitive impairment is now being diagnosed as Alzheimer's disease. He lives in Wickenburg, and he has awareness of it. He has awareness that he cannot drive anymore, that he's had to move into independent living, and he's grieving. He's really sad about it. He's sorry he can't drive anymore. He had to give up his dog because this particular living situation that was about the only one in his neighborhood would not allow a pet. So fortunately, his friends took his dog, and he'll get to see that dog daily. But he's actually going to have some counseling because he has some insight and awareness into what's happening, and he's a good candidate to receive some counseling to get support with some of these losses that occur early in the disease. So just some other resources and information. The Alzheimer's Association Area Agency on Aging, that Family Conversations Guide, I think is excellent, and the AARP resources that are actually outside on the table as well. So I think we're going to wrap up. We'll have time for questions on our panel, and I always put this on our slides if you need information about our programs, and actually on the Banner ALC website, we have lots of recorded classes and webinars if you need or have a quest for more information. Thank you so much for your time and attention.